Fresh off of AVX and Rick Remender's run on X-Force, we get Uncanny Avengers. This was a flagship book, really Marvel's biggest book, coming out of the Revolution with a capital R, Marvel Now. Rick Remender, John Cassaday, big marquee team in the book. How does it do? Hey everybody, this is Perch. Uncanny Avengers is a fascinating series. The first run, there were at least three different runs of Uncanny Avengers, but it's such a comic book and a time capsule because it does several things. First, it's coming right out of AVX, the full tilt of Cyclops being a villain. It is trying to really rehab characters like Scarlet Witch and Havok. And it's also the first time we really had kind of Mutants Avengers in a mashed up merged book, thus Uncanny Avengers. It is also Rick Remender, who had come off of X-Force and been had just a really celebrated run. X-Force is one of those kind of that he ran, very celebrated. It's one of the comic arcs, certainly in the last 15 years or so, that I think most fans put at the top or close to the top of just consistent good run of comics. John Cassaday, on the other hand, is coming off of astonishing X-Men at the time. He's really had kind of highlighted himself as a marquee Marvel artist after doing work on Planetary and other books. But the combination of the two, Remender Cassaday was at the forefront of the Marvel Now initiative, and the team was going to be stacked. We were going to have Captain America, Scarlet Witch, Thor, Wolverine, Rouge, and Havok. And this was going to be kind of the team to also clean up a lot of things. When Remender came onto it, there was a lot of elements where he was trying to kind of scrub things clean and come up with a solid story out of AVX. There was a lot of things that Bendis had done with characters like Wonder Man and others that he was trying to also clean up. Thor was in a really weird place after Fear Itself, and Matt Fraction's run had put it at odds. Wolverine they're kind of challenged with what they were doing there. So all over the place, we were seeing just a lot of different things going on. And then simultaneously, we start to get into Jonathan Hickman's run on Avengers, which is going to take things in a completely new direction. So the other unique part about this book that we actually get into the review is Remender sets out a plan that's going to use kind of major characters, both from the Avengers and from the X-Men. He's going to pick up on a lot of threads from his X-Force run. We're going to see, Kang. We're going to see Ahab from X-Men lore. We're going to see Archangel's kids. We're going to see the Red Skull. This is all going to lead up to his master plan, which was Axis, which was his big crossover. And what's interesting is he put a lot of effort into building these storylines. I mean, we go, full 25 issues, a little over 2 years, before we get to kind of really paying off some things in his first arc. And what's interesting about that is that you see kind of through this comic, you see the politics of what Brian Michael Bendis was doing over in X-Men. He took over Uncanny X-Men and then just X-Men with Cyclops. And you saw what Hickman was building up to with his Infinity story arc. It is fascinating to watch the conflict, I think, really go into all of this and how it all plays out. Remender had a game plan. It's clearly not a game plan that the other writers were doing at the time. And so it's just interesting to see. So sorry for that long preamble. At any rate, the comic jumps right into kind of a thoroughly gross scene. And by the way, if you have followed Remender, he does crazy, over-the-top sci-fi type storylines that shouldn't work. And many times they do work, but they shouldn't work on paper. But they're definitely out of the box. He brings new things. And like any Avengers relaunch, we're going to have a comic here of finding team members and convincing them to join, kind of assembling the team, because that's the true Avengers trope over now 5 decades. But we open up with somebody, mysterious villain, basically cutting open the skull of someone. We later learn it's Avalanche, and they're kind of implanting some kind of device in there, and really just kind of, you're seeing the brain, you're seeing this evil villain speech about tyranny and mutant kind and hatred. It's this again really picking up off AVX, and sure enough, on our next page, we're moved right into the funeral of Charles Xavier, who had died during AVX, and how Wolverine is most moved by this, and Rogue, which are not who you'd expect. I mean, part of this is the betrayal of Cyclops, who was the one who killed Professor X. But Wolverine gives a very impassioned speech, unusual for him, about a world where humans and mutants got along. Remember, he's also coming off of X-Force, which taught him how violence is not the solution and kind of the mistakes that he made and everything else. So as he's giving this speech, Alex Summers is going to visit his brother, who is now held in prison, and in this kind of ruby quartz prison. And so we get the juxtaposition of Alex talking to Scott and Wolverine talking about Charles Xavier's funeral. And just kind of we're seeing various faces. Magneto is watching from a distance. We're seeing kind of both the sadness, the depression of the dream lives on, but also that it was that mutants failed Charles Xavier. So this is very much an aftermath of AVX. We get this kind of very, Cyclops is very much turned into a zealot at this point. Havok is kind of talking about, I did what I had to, and this is, why did you give up on the dream? Cyclops, I learned better. And you forgot everything Charles taught you, and then you killed him. So very much, we're setting Alex up as the idealist now, and Cyclops up as the kind of the person who's been tipped too far. He is the new Magneto in this world. So Alex, as he's leaving the prison, gets intercepted by Thor and Captain America. Thor reveals that he likes lattes, and they basically are saying, we need to kind of do something different. That part of Scott's complaint during AVX was that mutants were left behind, that the Avengers never cared. They never fought with their struggle, which was true. The mutants, and this was always something that the comics never reconciled well, is that the mutants were always left on their own with mutant massacre or people going out and mutant kind being a racism allegory in a lot of cases. And yet, the Avengers are supposed to be the champions, and they kind of just, they leave things alone. They let the mutants kind of figure out their own thing, but the mutants are often showing up to help when the Avengers are in trouble. So it's kind of, this thing. They're kind of going back and forth. Captain America's laying out that we want you to become an Avenger. More than that, we want you to lead the squad. That the Avengers and the X-Men are working together, half PR. And it's kind of revealed here. Part of this is we want Alex Summers to kind of come out and be the face of this, because it's going to be a way of regaining trust with mutants, because Cyclops, his brother, was the one who took things off stray. But Alex is maybe not a good leader. That's the underlying current here. It's something that's going to be throughout the comic, is that Alex has always struggled as a leader. He's led teams, but he's never, it's never worked. It's never been as natural as what Cyclops and others, even Storm, certainly has been a natural leader, and Alex has always struggled with it. So while this is going on, Avalanche shows up, and he's going to cause some havoc in, no pun intended, in downtown New York. So as they're trying to convince Alex, suddenly, an earthquake moves in. He says, "Wake up! Time for the humans. The mutants are back." But he's clearly being controlled. "You hunted us, herd us into camps," and he just starts murdering people like crazy. So Captain America, Thor show up. Then we see a cool little move where Captain America gets Havok to blast him up to fight Avalanche. Thor is rescuing civilians, and just as Captain America reaches Avalanche, he basically jumps and kills himself. So we assume he basically falls, but what's left is absolute wreckage. The world is broken, and there's rubble everywhere. Captain America's looking down at this 9/11 style destruction of New York. Havok's helping move things along, but it's highlighting the fact that the human mutant tension is bigger than ever, and nothing has been healed, and AVX just ignited it further. We skip away from that kind of grim scene to the Scarlet Witch, who is crying over Charles Xavier's grave. She realized she was a terrified mutant with too much power. Later on, Remender would retcon the mutant out of her through Axis, but to the moment, she is basically mourning, and up comes Rogue, who's turned kind of back to how she was at the beginning. She's become the new Wolverine, whereas Wolverine's turned toward acknowledgement of peace and where things went astray and why the dream must survive. Rogue is turned bitter, and she is get out of here. you killed him. She's filled with a lot of anger and really disgust over how the humans have treated. And as Scarlet Witch in particular, since she, did the No More Mutants thing, Scarlet Witch has been a perpetual, mess for the Marvel Universe in terms of causing great damage. So they have a little argument, and just as Rogue punches her and is ready to take her power, and maybe permanently, like she did with Captain Marvel, there's a massive explosion, and a very strange new group of villains arrives, kind of jackboot type thugs arrives, and they with weird powers. This is classic Remender. There's the living wind, and I suffer the insect unto myself for the good of man, and just very weird dialogue. So Scarlet Witch gets impaled in this. This is seriously injured, saving Rogue, who's surprised by this, doesn't know what to expect. Rogue is kind of off put here, and they get just basically destroyed. That they get kidnapped by these villains and drug away, and they take something else. What, we don't know, but they're at the grave of Charles Xavier, so maybe we have a clue. We flash back to the evil villain lair, where we discover this very gory surgery going on, and sure enough, it's the Red Skull. And he has basically taken the corpse of Charles Xavier and is saying, with the brain of Charles Xavier, the Red Skull will eradicate the mutant menace. So the Red Skull is going to, put Charles Xavier's brain or power. So he's carved out Charles Xavier's brain. It's a super gory sequence, and he's going to use it to sow more kind of racist Nazi kind of propaganda against mutants this time. So that's where we land with this issue. Where does this go from here? Well, like I said, the Red Skull kind of does his plot for a while, but the Avengers are not successful in stopping it. Kind of 4-issue arc. We then expand the team with a couple more members. We get Sunfire, which is a fun addition. We get Wonder Man. We get the Wasp. And the tensions continue to boil over. The mutants and the human part of the team do not coexist well. Wolverine's battling his inner demons from the X-Force run. Rogue continues to be dark and angry. Scarlet Witch is tied in the middle. Wonder Man's being a pacifist. Captain America continues to question Havok's leadership. And it's got a lot of personal dynamics that are really reminiscent of how the X-Men comics were, and how the Avengers comics were back in the 70s and 80s, where there's a lot of inner turmoil and conflict. Had a lot of really amazing artists on this. We had Cassaday, we have Oliver Capil, we have a handful of Daniel Kuna, Steve McNiven, a lot of really solid artists throughout this run. And it all leads up to, the Apocalypse twins coming back and that whole mess, and then alternate reality of a planet of mutants. But the theme it's exploring is, can mutants and humans ever coexist? How do they work together to provide unity? How do we repair? And so Remender takes his time. Again, there's 2 issues, and it leads into Axis, where the comic really gets to the point at the end where the answer is no. They can't work together. It's quite an interesting run. It does not have the same punch that the X-Force run had, but it is interesting because if you're not into Hickman's things at the time, then this run was a nice way to have a very different Avengers team. It didn't tie into anything, as I mentioned before, and it really does a good job of writing super epic kind of Avengers plus X-Men threats. I mean, characters springing from the dead, a new 4 horsemen, the entire planet's blowing up, Celestials. I mean, it's got a lot of everything. Red Skull becoming Onslaught and really wrecking stuff. So I enjoyed this run a lot because the ideas were huge, because they were, Remender is swinging for the fences and really trying to do something big. It feels like an important Avengers title. It was billed and advertised as such. It had the art talent and the other things for it. But like I mentioned before, it's very interesting to watch how at many times the other writers just undercut what was going on here. They wouldn't refer to it. They wouldn't acknowledge it. They would kind of continue to do their own thing. And it wound up with a very uneven approach when all was said and done. And it really contributed. You can see the end of Remender's run really come to pass with this series. He briefly relaunches Uncanny X-Men later, Uncanny Avengers later, but only gets a couple issues into it before it's relaunched a second time under the watch of Gary Duggan. So it is a very curious run, and it is you can see Remender basically gearing up to leave Marvel through this whole series. It's a fascinating little approach. Anyway, did you like this issue? I've met people, either they loved it, they thought it was great, or it was just too out there for them. They didn't care for it. They didn't like the discord between what Hickman was doing at the time and what Remender was doing. And really, again, Remender was going, because he was merging two universes together, he was having to juggle between Hickman and Bendis. And, to be fair on both sides, nobody was helping anybody. So Remender was not taking the beats that were being introduced in those books. They were not taking the beats that were introduced into his book. And but Marvel was billing this as the flagship title. So arguably, people should have drawn into this, but they didn't. So an interesting book, interesting how it's aged, and definitely would like to know your feelings on. So leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts, your feelings, your what you liked, didn't like. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. Throw a like on the video. I really appreciate it if you would do that. Introduce to a friend. That's how we grow our audience, which I very much appreciate. You can follow me at Twitter at Comic Perch, and thanks for listening.